Welcome to a forthright audio podcast of last week's newspaper column, read with additional commentary and published on Substack with links to a whole lot of background reading. As published Thursday, May 9th, 2024 in the Spokesman Review. Nobody asked the grizzly bears. When the National Park Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service made their final decision on translocating grizzly bears to the North Cascades, important voices weren't meaningfully consulted. Not just human voices, but the grizzly bears. Feeling ignored wasn't surprising to the people living in and around the North Cascades. Rural residents are used to policies developed in Olympia and Washington, D.C. being imposed over their objections. Last November, 600 people showed up to a public meeting in Okanogan County, mostly in opposition. As one resident said, "I don't know what good these meetings do because we keep on going to meetings and nothing ever goes our way," according to a KUOW Northwest News Network report. But why not look at this from the bears' point of view, as the Capital Press wrote in a May 2nd editorial? Happy Canadian grizzly bears are settled into their own territories in British Columbia. They know where and when is the best time to harvest the huckleberries, dig up roots, or whack a few rabbits. Bet they have favorite spots to nap on a summer afternoon and den up in the winter, eh? Then helpful government folks come along in a helicopter shooting tranquilizer darts, and the grizzlies wake up hundreds of miles away with hangovers. Now they are confused grizzly bears transplanted into strange territory, inevitably bumping into disgruntled people. Both species can blame the federal government, or at least the humans will. The bears are just pawns trying to figure out where and what to eat. Grizzly bears are opportunistic omnivores. It's their survival strength and their social weakness. They adapt to what's readily available, whether that's a coop full of chickens, a calf bawling for its mother, or salmon in a stream. Human food sources are always a problem in bear country, but in the North Cascades, so are the salmon. Former Spokane resident Steve Busch, who recently transplanted himself to Idaho, said he has read the 416-page environmental impact statement. One of the things he could not find was any mention of salmon poisoning disease. Quoting Steve, WSU researchers did not find any population of bears that might be able to tolerate the unique strain of parasitic bacteria that is contained in salmon south of the Canadian border. Busch said the hope is, quote, that translocated bears will not eat salmon, which is why only interior BC bears and Idaho-Montana bears will be translocated, as they are used to eating grubs, other wildlife, berries, and carrion. Researchers also hope the bears will not follow rivers into populated western Washington neighborhoods, as they learn to associate the West Slope rivers with food, just like they do along the BC and Alaska coasts, end quote. According to an article in the Journal of Wildlife Management referenced by the WSU research, quote, wildlife restoration programs depend on having animals that have evolved to handle the constraints, including disease, posed by the new environment, end quote. Canadian grizzly bears have started moving farther south into the North Cascades of Washington, but they're a self-selected bunch of migrants, and that may mean they're adapting to the change in diet gradually. Hikers and backpackers already know they need to be bear aware, or at least the experienced humans do. As a young college student, Spokane landscape architect Ken Van Voorhees had a grizzly bear encounter in Glacier National Park while day hiking that left him with 40 stitches and a good story. "It was like those jokes where you don't have to outrun the bear, you have to outrun the other guy," Van Voorhees joked when telling the story. Fortunately, the other guy turned back and helped drive the bear off. Van Voorhees said in hindsight there were more precautions they could have taken. Quote, "I still feel strongly as a hiker that we were in their territory and we needed to be conscientious. Rangers determined this wasn't a problem bear, it was an accidental encounter. The bears need a place to be. Private land is different, but if it's public land, they have to be there," end quote. It's the private land that concerns people like Rachel McClure with the Okanogan County Cattlemen's Association. Bears don't read government maps. She spoke for her neighbors when she said, "We'll take the ones that come, don't damn bring them in a trailer," according to Northwest News Network reports on the Okanogan County meeting. Fortunately, the final decision lists grizzly bears as an experimental population instead of an endangered species, giving federal agencies more options for dealing with troublesome bears that develop bad habits, and local residents will have to develop new habits. Perhaps the advice of Meriwether Lewis, recorded in the journals of the Journey of Discovery on June 28, 1805, will be useful. Lewis reported the grizzly bears, quote, have become so troublesome to us that I do not think it prudent to send one man alone on an errand of any kind, particularly where he has to pass through the brush. They come close around our camp every night, but have never yet ventured to attack us, and our dog gives us timely notice of their visits. He keeps constantly patrolling all night. I have made the men sleep with their arms by them, as usual, for fear of accidents. End quote. That was the end of the column, and I ended the column with a quote from Lewis and Clark because it emphasizes how the reintroduction of grizzly bears requires changes in human behavior, just like the gentlemen on the journey of discovery had to change their behavior to deal with the grizzly bears. If the desire is to return to frontier days conditions, then frontier days lifestyles, including carrying firearms regularly and openly, has to be part of the package. The Substack post for this column includes links to a lot of interesting background articles behind my editorial remarks. I was greatly helped by the research of Steve Busch, who is dogged in his pursuit of many issues related to the intersection of private property rights, quality of life for rural residents, and the agenda of environmental groups like the Yellowstone Yukon Conservation Initiative, pushing rewilding of Northeast Washington. I did get one email on this that I meant to pull up so that I could read from someone who basically felt that he was in agreement. He saw it as a case of people from the government showing up saying, "I'm from the government. I'm here to help," and Bear's not quite taking it that way. I mean, nobody asked the grizzly bears if they want to be translocated from their home turf, where they've learned the food sources, they've learned the territory, they've learned what is and isn't good food from their mothers, and they're settled. And the Y2Y Conservation Initiative hasn't bothered to ask humans living in Northeast Washington if they want to be translocated from their home turf to a city somewhere. There's this idea that living in a rural area is just somehow not enough. So everybody needs to move to the city. And then there's a whole lot of people who live in rural areas that don't feel that way. This situation with the grizzly bears in the North Cascades illustrates the kind of actions coming out of government centers that drive the resentment from rural Washingtonians. It's a reaction to the meddling of outside experts seeking to rearrange their lives and the ecosystem in which they live without really meaningful input, and to create some ideal of what normal is supposed to be, when normal is an ever-changing target in an ecosystem. So the inspiration for this column really came from that full Capital Press editorial with the last line, the best analogy ever on grizzly reintroduction in the North Cascades. Capital Press editors wrote, "It's a bit like going to Portland to tranquilize hipsters so that they can be reintroduced to Des Moines. Sure, some won't survive, but it's important that a population be reestablished in their historic home range." We don't go around transplanting people. I think we should be a little careful about how we transplant wildlife. The grizzly bears won't stay put. As they try to figure out their new territory, there's no reason for them to consider human settlements as anything other than just fair game. So there will be conflicts. And I'm pretty sure there are no vegan grizzly bears out there who will turn their noses up at pursuing salmon. And they will continue to pursue an omnivorous diet instead of a berry-based diet, as one of the out-of-touch articles that I've linked to below has reported. I did have an interesting exchange with a civil and thoughtful correspondent on Twitter, now known as X. She said she had been part of a translocation project some years ago that was more successful than the one where they transplanted mountain goats from the Olympics to into the Cascades, and 2 out of 150 managed to survive. The others all died. Some have been successful, and she proposed that because we had messed things up in killing off so many grizzlies that the population had declined, that we needed to put things back right. And I disagree. We cannot recreate the past, except at great social, economic, and environmental cost. We can choose to let the bears naturally migrate and extend their range following their normal diet. Natural migration would be a more balanced solution instead of bringing them in a damn trailer or a helicopter. Let the grizzly bears decide instead of well-meaning human experts, because even the experts admit the depth of their knowledge is limited. So again, the reference links to the sources used in the column, as well as links to a lot more background reading, are included at the end of the Substack post. Please subscribe for notifications of new content with or without a pledge. And your feedback on format and content are always welcome. Thanks for listening.